I remember the first night I arrived in the town of Pine Hollow like it was yesterday. It was late autumn, and the chill of the evening air cut right through my jacket as I drove past the old sign at the town's entrance. Welcome to Pine Hollow, population, 1,542. The small town was known for its quiet life and untouched nature, a place to escape the chaos of the world, or so I thought. I'd gotten a job as a mechanic at a local shop, an offer that seemed too good to refuse. Small towns often had a way of making people feel like family, and Pine Hollow seemed no different. As soon as I arrived, everyone greeted me with smiles and pleasantries, the kind of hospitality you don't find in a big city. But, as night fell, something didn't feel quite right. The streets were eerily empty, and the only sounds were the rustling of the trees. No dogs barking. No children playing. I thought maybe it was just because I'd arrived after dark. But then, the air felt thick, like something was hanging over the place. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just the quietness of small-town life. That night, as I lay in the small, creaky bed in the room above the garage I was renting, I heard something. At first, it was just a low, almost imperceptible scratching sound against the window, like an animal pawing at the glass. But as I listened, the scratching grew louder, more deliberate. I got up to investigate, half expecting a raccoon or a stray cat. But when I peeked out the window, I didn't see anything, just the dark, empty street. Still, the sound persisted. I pulled the blinds shut and tried to ignore it, telling myself it was nothing. But as I lay back down, the sound came again, louder this time, followed by what could only be described as a heavy thud, like something, or someone, was pressing against the side of the building. I froze. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow move past the window. I rushed to the door, yanking it open and stepping out onto the porch. The night air hit me like ice, but there was no one there, nothing to explain the feeling creeping down my spine. I told myself it was just my imagination running wild, a result of the long drive and the unfamiliar surroundings. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The next morning, I ran into a local named Steve, who worked at the diner down the street. He seemed like a nice enough guy, but when I mentioned the noises from the night before, his face went pale. "Don't listen to that stuff," he said, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. "Old houses make weird sounds, especially around here. You'll get used to it." But something in the way he said it made me uneasy. Like there was something he wasn't telling me. Later that day, I stopped by the local library to grab a book, and while scanning the shelves, I overheard an old woman whispering to the librarian. "New guy's here," she said. "He won't last long. None of them ever do." The librarian shushed her, but it was too late. I'd heard enough. What the hell did that mean? I was starting to wonder if I'd made a huge mistake. That night, I locked all the doors and windows, double-checked everything, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I tried to sleep, but the feeling lingered. Then, at exactly midnight, I heard it again, the scratching, followed by the thud, and then the unmistakable sound of something dragging across the ground. This time, I wasn't going to just lie there. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, the cold biting into my skin. The street was silent. Not a single light was on in any of the houses. I walked around the side of the garage, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. That's when I saw it. A figure, hunched over, slowly dragging something heavy along the ground. My breath caught in my throat. The figure turned its head slowly, and in the dim light, I saw the most horrifying thing I've ever seen in my life, pale, hollow eyes staring back at me, its face covered in dirt and grime. It opened its mouth, but no sound came out. I ran. I bolted back into the garage, slammed the door shut, and locked it. My heart pounded in my chest, and my mind raced. I couldn't understand what had just happened. Was it a person? Or something else? But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that the next morning, the garage door was wide open. I know I locked it. And the worst part was, there was something on the ground, a fresh trail of dirt, leading straight into the woods. The sun was barely up the next morning, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The trail of dirt was still there, stretching out into the woods behind the garage, as though it had been waiting for me to notice it. I stood there frozen, staring at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I couldn't be imagining this, too much had happened already. I stepped cautiously outside, the air still chilly from the night's frost. Every inch of me screamed to turn around and leave Pine Hollow, but I couldn't. Something about that trail kept me tethered to the ground. Like if I didn't follow it, I'd be ignoring some terrible truth that was just beyond my reach. I grabbed a jacket, stuffed my flashlight into my pocket, and started walking toward the woods. The dirt trail led me into the dense forest that bordered the town. The trees were thick, their branches twisting like gnarled fingers against the pale blue sky. I pushed through the underbrush, the crunch of leaves beneath my boots the only sound in the silence. As I walked deeper into the woods, a strange feeling washed over me, a feeling I couldn't quite explain. The air felt heavier here, as though it was closing in around me. The farther I went, the more my chest tightened, and the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I had no idea what I was looking for. All I knew was that I needed answers. After what felt like hours, the trail finally led me to a clearing. In the center, a small, decaying shack stood half-collapsed, its windows broken, the door hanging off its hinges. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. And yet, there it was, standing like a silent sentinel in the middle of nowhere. I approached slowly, each step making my heartbeat louder in my ears. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and the smell of rot and decay hit me like a punch to the gut. Inside, it was pitch black, the only light coming from the crack in the door. I pulled out my flashlight and scanned the room. The walls were covered in strange symbols, etched into the wood like something, or someone, had carved them by hand. The floor was littered with old, yellowed papers, some of them torn and faded, others covered in ink I couldn't understand. It was as if the place had been abandoned long ago, but the more I looked around, the more I realized, it hadn't. On the far side of the room, there was something that made my blood run cold, a chair. Tied to it was a rope, frayed at the edges, and scattered around it were old, rusted tools, some of them stained dark red. I couldn't stop staring at the chair. It felt wrong. Like it had seen things it should never have. That's when I heard it. A low, guttural growl from somewhere behind me. I spun around, the beam of my flashlight bouncing off the walls. The growl was closer now, followed by a heavy breathing sound, like something was watching me. My hand trembled as I held the flashlight, but there was nothing there, nothing but the empty, rotting shack. Then, the air grew colder, and the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening crash. I tried to yank it open, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I knew I had to find another way out. My flashlight flickered, casting shadows across the room, and that's when I saw it, a shape, standing in the corner, just out of the beam's reach. It was the same figure I'd seen the night before, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. It was hunched over, its body twisted in unnatural angles. It didn't move, just stood there, watching me. I could feel my throat tighten as my breathing grew shallow. What was it? Why was it here? And why did it seem so familiar? I backed away slowly, but the figure didn't follow. It just stayed in that corner, like it was waiting for something. That's when the whispering started. It wasn't in my ears. It was inside my head. I couldn't make out the words, but I could feel them, dark, ancient, and somehow, familiar. It was as if the very air in the shack was alive, whispering things I couldn't understand, things I didn't want to understand. I took one last look at the figure before I ran for the window. It was small enough for me to crawl through, but when I looked back, it was gone. There was no sign of it, no trace that it had ever been there at all. I didn't stop running until I reached the edge of the woods. When I looked back, Pine Hollow was still there, silent, untouched, but it felt different now. It was as though the town itself had changed, and the woods had claimed a part of me. I couldn't explain what I'd seen. But one thing was for sure, Pine Hollow wasn't just another small town. It was something much darker. And whatever was hiding in those woods, I had a feeling it wasn't going to leave me alone. For days after my escape from the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I looked over my shoulder, I thought I saw a shadow flicker just beyond my peripheral vision. The people of Pine Hollow seemed oblivious to everything I had experienced, at least, they acted that way. The same friendly smiles, the same small-town charm, but I knew better now. The town wasn't what it seemed. I kept my distance from the woods, but the memories haunted me. The growl. The whispers. The figure in the corner of the shack. I couldn't understand any of it. What was that thing? Why had it been there? And why was it in my mind, even when I wasn't thinking about it? The whispers, they kept coming back. Not just in the woods, but when I was lying in bed, when I was working, when I was alone. I tried to ignore it, but the more I pushed it away, the more it crept back in. One evening, after another long, sleepless night, I decided to visit Steve at the diner. I figured if anyone knew something about the town's strange happenings, it'd be him. He was one of the few people in town who didn't seem to give me that overly rehearsed, everything's fine, just a quiet place to live, vibe. I needed to know more. The diner was empty when I walked in, save for a few elderly locals nursing their coffee and chatting quietly. Steve looked up from behind the counter and waved me over. "You look like hell," he said, setting down a mug and wiping his hands on a rag. "Yeah, I've been better," I replied, sitting down at the counter. "I need to ask you something. About Pine Hollow. About the woods." Steve froze for just a moment. It was barely noticeable, but I caught it. The slight tension in his shoulders. "What about it?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "The night I arrived, I heard things. And then there was something in the woods. I don't know what it was, but I think it was following me. And the shack, there were symbols inside, and," Steve's face shifted, the easygoing smile gone. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Don't talk about it. Not here." I was taken aback. "What do you mean, don't talk about it?" Steve glanced around, as if checking to make sure no one was listening. Then, without a word, he slid a small, tattered book across the counter to me. The cover was worn, and the pages were yellowed with age. I opened it, only to be met with strange drawings, symbols, and cryptic phrases I couldn't understand. "The townspeople, they don't talk about it," Steve continued, glancing over his shoulder again. "There are things here, things we don't understand. And if you go looking for answers, they'll come for you. They always do." I shook my head, trying to make sense of what he was saying. "What are you talking about? What's in the woods? And why do I feel like something's following me?" Steve looked down, almost regretful, then leaned in even closer. His breath smelled like stale coffee. The town was built on something old, older than anyone here. Pine Hollow wasn't always here. It was founded on a promise, a pact, a deal made by people who wanted more than they were willing to give. And the price is still being paid. He looked up at me, his eyes dark, as if the words he was speaking were beyond his control. "Whatever you saw, that's just the beginning. The woods are alive." A chill ran through me. I couldn't breathe. "What are you saying? What does that mean?" "You'll see," he said quietly. "But you won't like it." I slammed the book shut, nearly knocking over my coffee. "Steve, this is insane. You're telling me that everything that's been happening here is because of some kind of deal?" A pact? Is this some kind of joke? He stood up abruptly, glancing around one last time before he said, "You're not the first. And you won't be the last. The woods, whatever's out there, it doesn't forget. And it doesn't let go." I couldn't get the words out of my head as I left the diner, Steve's cryptic warning echoing in my mind. The woods are alive. The night after that conversation, I thought I could finally get some rest. I tried to push everything out of my mind. Maybe Steve was just an old man spinning tales, trying to scare me. But as the darkness crept in around me, I felt it again, those whispers. But this time, they weren't just in my head. They were coming from somewhere else. I woke up to the sound of soft knocking at the window. My heart dropped into my stomach. Slowly, I turned my head. There, standing in the window, was the figure. Its hollow eyes staring into mine. I froze. This time, there was no growl. No scraping of nails. It didn't move. It didn't speak. But I knew one thing, it was waiting for me. I bolted upright and reached for the door handle, but when I tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. The door was locked, but it was as though something on the other side was holding it shut. I pressed against it, panicked, but it wouldn't move. I turned back to the window. The figure was gone. But I knew. I wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, I woke up in a cold sweat, the remnants of the nightmare lingering like a shadow over me. I knew I hadn't imagined what happened. I felt it, the pressure against the door, the oppressive air in the room. But when I opened my eyes, everything was just as it should have been. The room was empty, quiet, still. I tried to push it all away, telling myself I had to keep moving, keep working, keep my head clear. I couldn't let whatever this was drive me mad. But I knew I was losing the battle. Steve's words echoed in my mind again, the woods are alive. It was the only explanation that made sense. But it didn't explain everything else, why the town felt different, why people acted like nothing was wrong, even as I saw more strange things. At work, I tried to focus on the cars in the shop, to lose myself in the familiar rhythm of fixing engines and tuning parts. But something wasn't right. The air felt thick, like the weight of the world had settled down upon my shoulders. I noticed things, small things, almost too small to mention. People walking by without saying a word, their eyes cast downward as they passed. I'd see figures standing at the edges of town, just standing, staring into the distance. No motion. No acknowledgement. Just there. It was too much. By noon, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers, real answers. I had to go back to the woods. I had to know what was out there, what had been following me, and why. I drove to the outskirts of Pine Hollow, my truck bumping along the rough, dirt road that led to the edge of the forest. My hands were shaking, but I didn't stop. The farther I went, the more the air seemed to close in on me, like the forest itself was suffocating the life out of the world around it. I parked the truck near the same clearing I'd found before and sat for a moment, trying to summon the courage to go in. The woods were still, unnervingly still. I stepped out of the truck, grabbed my flashlight, and began walking. Each step was like walking into a different world. The trees seemed taller now, the shadows deeper. The branches above me twisted together, blocking out the sun, leaving the path bathed in an eerie twilight. As I moved deeper into the forest, the whispers started again, faint at first, like the murmur of wind through the trees. But as I walked, they grew louder. The voices, indistinct but filled with malice, filled the air around me. I didn't turn back. The clearing with the shack came into view, its decaying walls a stark contrast against the living, breathing wood surrounding it. I approached cautiously, my flashlight bouncing against the broken structure. My breath came in short bursts as I stepped through the door. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of decay, the walls covered in those strange symbols again. But this time, I noticed something new. In the center of the room, lying in a circle, were more objects, dolls, their faces cracked and their eyes hollow. I bent down to get a closer look, my heart racing. They were arranged in a pattern, their heads all turned in the same direction, toward the wall. There was something unsettling about them. The way their eyes seemed to follow my every movement. I stood back up, my hands shaking, trying to steady my breathing. That's when I heard it. A voice. Clear and sharp this time. You shouldn't have come here. I spun around, my flashlight beam skittering across the room. There was no one there. But I could feel it, something was in the room with me. The temperature dropped, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. You shouldn't have come here. The voice was louder now, coming from everywhere. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to get out. I had to leave before whatever was in this place took me, too. I turned toward the door, but it slammed shut, the sound reverberating through the shack. I yanked at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as I frantically searched for another way out. That's when I saw it, the figure from before, standing in the corner. It wasn't hunched over this time, but standing tall, as if waiting for me. Its pale eyes locked onto mine. I couldn't move. My body was frozen in place, as if it had control over me. The air was thick with its presence, and I could feel the ground beneath me start to vibrate, a low hum rising from deep within the earth. You belong to the woods now. The voice came again, but this time it was different, it was inside my head. It was the trees, the earth, the very land beneath my feet, whispering their claim over me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. And then, everything went black. I woke up back in my bed, drenched in sweat, my chest heaving. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it all. But the pain in my arms told me otherwise. My skin was marked, bruised in places I couldn't explain. As I looked around my room, I saw it, the window was open, the same cold wind from the woods creeping inside. But this time, I knew I wasn't alone. The whispering had followed me home. And now, there was no escape. I didn't leave my room the entire day. The morning light seemed too harsh after the dark nightmare that had swallowed me whole. I sat on the edge of the bed, my mind racing. What had happened in the woods? Had it all been a dream? Or had the forest, the woods, taken something from me? Something I couldn't even name. The whispers were louder now. Not in my head, not just in my thoughts, but around me. In the walls, in the very air I breathed. I could feel them seeping in, twisting through the house like something alive. I looked at the clock, it was already late afternoon, but the light outside was dim, a sickly orange glow hanging low in the sky. Something wasn't right. I stepped out of the room, my legs unsteady beneath me. I tried to ignore the dizziness creeping in, the strange pull I felt to step outside, to walk straight into the woods. That's when I heard it. A knock. Soft. Persistent. I froze, standing in the hallway. It was coming from the front door. There was no one in Pine Hollow anymore. People had all but stopped visiting each other, and the only person I saw regularly was Steve. I hadn't seen anyone else for days. The knock came again. Louder this time. I walked to the door, the creak of the floorboards under my feet deafening in the silence. I didn't know what to expect. But I didn't want to open it. Not with the air feeling like it was pressing down on me. When I finally reached the door, I hesitated. I glanced through the peephole. Nothing. Just the dark of the evening stretching out in front of me, as still and empty as the rest of Pine Hollow. But the knocking hadn't stopped. I slowly opened the door, only to find nothing. The porch was empty, the cool evening air swirling around me, as if mocking me. That's when I heard it again. A voice. We are waiting. I spun around, heart pounding, but I saw nothing. No one. "We are waiting." The voice came again, louder this time, like it was coming from deep within the earth itself. The ground beneath me trembled, and the world seemed to warp, like the very fabric of reality was beginning to tear. I backed away from the door, my mind racing, trying to make sense of the impossible. My eyes flicked over to the woods. The trees were alive, their twisted limbs reaching out, as if beckoning me. The whispers didn't stop. They were everywhere. They filled my ears, my mind, my soul. And then, a shadow appeared in the doorway. I didn't want to turn around, but I couldn't help myself. The figure stood there, tall and impossibly still. The pale, hollow eyes locked onto mine. I couldn't breathe. The figure tilted its head, just slightly, almost as if it were listening. I stumbled backward, my feet tripping over the threshold as I tried to get away. But it wasn't moving, it wasn't walking. It was just standing there, like it was waiting for something, for me. Suddenly, the ground shook, the air went cold, and the house itself seemed to groan, like it was alive and in pain. The whispers became a cacophony of voices, all speaking at once, filling my skull until I thought I might go mad. And then, the door slammed shut. The figure was gone. But I could still feel it, its eyes, burning into me from some corner of the room. I had to get out of here. I ran, heart hammering in my chest, bursting through the front door and into the night. The air outside was thick with fog, the town now silent, as if holding its breath. I ran, deeper into the woods, my feet pounding the earth as the whispers followed, wrapping around me like a noose. I don't know how long I ran. Time felt like it had ceased to exist. But eventually, I found myself at the clearing again, standing in front of the shack, the same place I had been before. Except this time, it was different. The shack was whole again. The walls were fresh, the roof intact. The symbols on the walls, no longer faded, no longer ancient, were vibrant, glowing faintly in the night. They seemed to hum, the sound vibrating through my chest. The air was thick with the smell of decay, but there was something else now, something alive in the air. And in the center of the room, the chair was empty. But the rope was there. I could feel it. The pull. Something was calling me to it, urging me to sit down. To take my place. You belong to us now. The voice was everywhere. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was a command. I stepped into the shack, my body moving against my will. My heart was in my throat, but my legs carried me forward. The chair. The rope. I couldn't stop. I sat down. The moment I did, everything stopped. The whispers went silent. The ground beneath me seemed to still. And then, slowly, I felt it, something inside me, something dark and ancient, slowly awakening. I could see it now, beneath the earth, beneath the trees, beneath the town. The roots of Pine Hollow. The creatures it had birthed. And the pact. I wasn't just a witness anymore. I was part of it. And Pine Hollow would never let me leave. I didn't know how long I sat in that chair. Time lost its meaning as the darkness around me seemed to stretch and pulse like something alive. The moment I sat down, I felt the ropes tighten around my wrists, not physically, but in my soul. It was as if the land itself had claimed me, bound me to its twisted core. The air in the shack grew heavier, thicker. The symbols on the walls began to glow more intensely, and I could feel their energy radiating through my body, crawling into my skin. It wasn't just the shack that had changed, it was me. I could feel the woods, deep beneath the earth, swirling and shifting, like they were aware of my presence. And then, it came. The figure, the same one I'd seen before, stepped out of the shadows. This time, its face was clearer. Pale, gaunt, with eyes that seemed to pierce through me, through everything. It didn't speak, but I could hear it in my head. The voice wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was a command, a wave of understanding that flooded my mind. You belong to us. I tried to move, to scream, but my body was frozen. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even breathe. The figure reached out, its hand extended, palm open toward me. It wasn't human, it couldn't be. The way it moved, the unnatural stillness in its posture, it was more like a shadow than a person, yet it had a presence that was suffocating, all-consuming. I felt a pressure in my chest, like something was squeezing the air out of my lungs. I struggled to breathe, but the more I fought, the stronger the sensation became. And then, the voice returned. But it wasn't just one voice, it was 1,000. A chorus, each one overlapping the other, reverberating inside my mind. The pact has been made. The woods are ours. The town is ours. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But there was nowhere to go. Pine Hollow, the woods, the very land, it was alive. It had always been alive. The figure's hand hovered over my face, and before I knew it, I was being pulled into its gaze. I saw the woods, not just as they were, but as they had been, as they had always been. I saw the roots, deep beneath the ground, intertwining with the very foundation of the town. I saw the people of Pine Hollow, their faces twisted, their souls bound to the land in ways I could never have imagined. And I understood. They had made a deal. A pact long ago, one that had kept the town alive, thriving, but at a cost. A cost that could never be paid in full. Each generation, each soul that passed through the town, became part of the bargain. And now, I was no different. You are the next, the voice echoed, as if it had always known. I could feel it now, the pull. Something deep within the earth was drawing me in. I couldn't escape. I couldn't fight it. I belonged to Pine Hollow now. The figure stepped back, and I finally regained control of my body. I stood up, but it was like I was watching myself move from somewhere far away. My legs carried me toward the door of the shack, but I didn't want to leave. Not now. Not after everything I had seen. The town wasn't just a place. It was a living, breathing entity. And I was a part of it. I stumbled outside, the fog thicker now, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. The town was silent, eerily so. The houses sat like dark sentinels, their windows reflecting nothing but the cold emptiness of the night. I could hear them now, the people of Pine Hollow. They were calling me. Their voices, low and soft, like a distant chant, echoing through the fog. I made my way toward the center of town, my feet moving on their own, carrying me toward the heart of Pine Hollow. And when I reached the old church at the town center, I saw them. The townspeople. They were standing there, waiting. Not a single one of them spoke, but I knew. They knew. And I understood. I had been chosen. As I stepped closer, the ground trembled beneath me. The whispers from the woods had followed me here, and now, they were louder, stronger. The townspeople gathered around me, their hollow eyes locked on mine. I could feel the weight of their gaze, as if they were welcoming me home. And that's when I understood. I wasn't just the next to be claimed. I was the sacrifice. The townspeople moved closer, surrounding me. They began to chant in low, guttural voices, their words thick with ancient power. The ground beneath us cracked, and the earth opened, revealing the roots that stretched out beneath the town, like an endless, living web. And in that moment, I knew, I wasn't going to be the one who escaped. I was the one who would feed the forest, feed the roots, feed the thing that had always been there, buried deep beneath Pine Hollow. The whispers grew louder, the chanting more frantic. I felt myself being pulled into the earth, the roots rising up to take me. The people of Pine Hollow stood around me, silent, waiting for the ritual to be complete. And then, the last thing I heard before the darkness swallowed me whole was a voice, not in my head, not a whisper, but a voice in the air. Welcome home. I woke in the dark. The earth was cold beneath me, and I could feel the dampness seeping into my bones. My body was stiff, and for a moment, I thought I might still be trapped in that terrible dream, but then the weight of reality pressed down on me. It wasn't a dream. It was real. I was buried. The ground was tight around me, the roots of the town, the forest, twisting and creeping into the very fabric of my being. I could feel them, the ancient, hungry tendrils burrowing into my chest, my mind, my soul. Pine Hollow was alive, more alive than I had ever known. The people, the town itself, had been waiting for this moment, and I was no longer an outsider. I had become part of the pact. The whispers surrounded me. Not just in my head anymore, but everywhere. They were in the air, in the earth, in the very walls of Pine Hollow. I could hear the voices of those who had come before me, their souls forever intertwined with the town's dark pulse. You are one of us now. The words echoed in my mind, but they weren't my thoughts. They were ancient, binding words, passed down through the generations. The town had claimed me. And I had no way to escape it. I tried to move, to scream, but my body wouldn't obey. It was as if I was suspended in time, held by invisible chains. My mind screamed for freedom, for release, but the forest's grasp tightened, and the darkness deepened. And then, the ground shifted. I gasped as I was pulled upward, out of the earth, as though the roots themselves had dragged me. The world around me blurred, and I felt the cold air against my skin once more. The forest towered above me, the trees swaying gently in a breeze that wasn't natural. I was standing in the clearing again, but it was different this time. The shack was gone, replaced with something else. A circle, made of stone, lay in the center of the clearing, surrounded by the townspeople. They were all there. Steve, the librarian, the old woman from the diner, even the children I had seen in the street. Their eyes were blank, empty, as if they were no longer fully human. The circle of stone pulsed with dark energy, and in its center stood the figure, the one I had seen before, its hollow eyes now glowing with an unnatural light. It was more than just a creature, it was the embodiment of the town, of the pact, of the darkness that had consumed everything. You are the final offering, the figure said, its voice not a whisper but a roar that shook the very air. The townspeople began to chant, their voices rising, blending into one single, maddening sound. It was ancient, it was powerful, and it was the sound of something that had been waiting for centuries to be fulfilled. And then, it happened. The ground cracked open beneath me, and the roots, the living roots, rose up once more, winding around my legs, my chest, my arms. The forest was pulling me down, drawing me into its depths. I could feel the life force being drained from me, absorbed into the soil, feeding the darkness. I looked around desperately, my eyes searching for any way out, but there was no escape. I was already lost. And then, I heard it. You belong to us now. The roots wrapped tighter, squeezing the air from my lungs. I could feel my body growing weaker, but the forest wouldn't let me go. I was being claimed, just as every person before me had been. But something was different this time. Something had shifted. As the roots consumed me, I realized what was happening. I wasn't just being absorbed into the town. I was becoming part of it. I was becoming the next one. The next soul to live in the woods. To watch over Pine Hollow.